1. I work in human resources in a highly regulated industry. I support 12 different departments managed by 5 different directors. Onboarding an employee from start to finish takes me about 2.5 hours. If people complete the steps as outlined, I can do it a little bit at a time. Example, complete the application, and I can run your initial background checks. Complete tax and employment paperwork, I can get the payroll shell set up. Get your doctor to sign off on your medical form, and I can do an evaluation of your fitness for work. And the final steps can be done in 10 minutes. Most directors understand this and encourage their applicants to get everything to me and respond to things in a timely manner. One director, John, has never grasped this concept. If his employees aren't ready to start, he calls me. If someone didn't complete their paperwork, he calls me. If someone says they did everything to start, he calls me. A typical conversation goes, "What's holding up Bob Smith from the Synergy team? It looks like he never sent in his license or filled out the I-9. What did he say when you spoke to him?" "I haven't spoke to him. That's why I'm calling you. He needs to start. This is a priority. Please follow up with him." As you may have inferred, onboarding is one part of my job. I have a lot of other duties, but when someone is ready to go, I make sure that they get done as soon as possible. With John, however, no matter where someone is in the process, it's priority 1 rush. There is no phrase that can make me instantly angry like priority 1 rush, because it's lost all meaning for me. John and I share the same boss, Paul, and Paul had repeatedly told John that he is not to harass me. He needs to understand I have other departments to support, and that by demanding everything take top priority, including files that are nowhere near completion, he's taking away from actual priorities. John has promised to stop, but then he goes back to it a week after saying, "But we need him to start. It has to be a priority." Many of these take the form of emails at 4:58 p.m. saying, "George is all set to start. I've told him that he can come in at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Please make sure all of his accounts and equipment are ready for him. This is priority 1 rush and must be completed." So after the last stunt, I told my boss what I'd love to do. He, surprisingly, told me to go ahead and he'd be fine with it. The other day, I had a new employee send me his medical file at 2 p.m. He was to work in one of our labs on a project. I was in the middle of a review when another applicant emailed me that he had finished his paperwork and CC'd John. This individual was to work in the office in a clerical job. Before I could even respond, John replied to all and included 2 other directors, saying that the man would be starting tomorrow, to get all of his accounts set up, and that this was priority 1. I replied to John, CC'd my boss, and told him I'd make it priority 1. So I immediately stopped working on the scientist's file and began reviewing the clerical employee's file. It was clear that he did not have everything he needed to start, and I was about to send an email telling him as much when another email came in informing me that another applicant for one of our lab teams, a technician, had filled out his I-9. My phone rang and it was John. You can guess where this is going. Sean, the manager, needs this person to start tomorrow. It's critical priority 1 that this person have everything set for tomorrow. I asked him to please send me an email, followed the same protocol as before, dropped the clerical file without another word and moved on to the technician. As I was in the middle of doing the checks for the technician, the front desk called to say that one of our new hires, a custodian, was having trouble completing the application, and that he'd like to have someone sit with him and help him. Knowing how this would play out, I suggested that she call John. Not even a minute later, John was on the phone with me telling me how urgent it was that this person start immediately, how it was my responsibility to provide this support, and how this should be treated as priority 1 rush. I apologized to John, told him I hadn't realized the urgency, and said I would sit with the gentleman and help him. That's exactly what I did. I sat down with him, walked him through everything, and we submitted the application together. Though, as he had no physician's clearance, he was nowhere near being close to be able to start. By that point, it was 5:15 p.m. I sent an email to John letting him know that I had assisted the new hire one-on-one as per his instructions of Priority 1 Rush, and CC'd our boss on it. The next day, my phone began blowing up. A scientist showed up at the lab and there was no equipment for him, and they didn't know he was coming. A clerical employee had no accounts and no access to the file rooms. A technician was not set up in the system, and none of them existed as an employee with clearance. In every case, my response was the same. My apologies. I was in the middle of processing the file when John demanded I drop it to address a much more important matter. Let me transfer you to him. John showed up at my office screaming and demanding to know why things weren't done. I looked at him, surprised, and told him that I was following his instructions, and if something was a Priority 1 rush, then it took precedence over everything else. He asked if I seriously thought that helping the custodian fill out his application took priority over getting equipment for a new scientist on a time-critical project. I replied, honestly, no. It seemed like a pretty bad decision, but when you said it was a priority, I trusted your judgment and your decision, figuring you knew something I didn't. He called me a moron and walked away. I later found out that he demanded my termination for the stunt. My boss told him that I had done exactly what he asked, and that the blame was entirely on him. He told him he could either trust my judgment to prioritize what needs to be done, or he could deal with the consequences of me following his instructions. Privately, my boss asked me not to do it again, because his boss was furious over the whole thing, and he had to admit he sanctioned it to stop my head from rolling. I'd like to say it stopped, but Priority 1 Rush is still one of John's favorite expressions, though thankfully it's been coming up much less frequently. 2. Recalling this story made my heart smile. A few years ago, I was building a new fence for a friend of mine. I had to remove the old sections that were falling apart first, of course, and when I got to the intersection of his back fence, his side fence, and the next-door neighbor's back fence, I carefully separated the neighbor's fence from his and proceeded to carry on removing the side sections that went between their two properties. My friend had told me that since the side section was 100% on his property, and that the previous owner, over 30 years ago, had deliberately given the next-door neighbor's property an extra foot or so to ensure that he was building on his own property without calling for and paying for a survey. The neighbor, Susan, whom I will refer to as Karen for the remainder of this story, came running outside screaming at me that I couldn't remove said fence as it was their property, and just what do I think I'm doing? I responded back, very calmly, that my friend had told them well in advance that he was going to replace the fence, that he was just going to build it in the same place as the old one, and asked if they were willing to split the costs, to which they declined. No biggie. Karen started screaming at me again, telling me I had no right to do that, and that my friend didn't give them proper notice, and that she didn't realize that there wouldn't be anything between their two properties to contain their dog. By now, I'm about ready to lose my shit, so I knocked on my friend's back door to let him know what was going on, and that he needed to talk to Karen. And that I was leaving because I didn't want to do or say anything I would regret or cause problems with the neighbors for my friend. The entire project got put on hold, pending a property survey that was going to cost $650, and that they demanded my friend pay half of, despite him telling them that the fence was definitely on his property, and nothing was going to change with the new fence, and that he was fine with them continuing to have a foot or so of his property so that he didn't have to rock the boat. Fast forward to the following Monday when the surveyor comes out. Turns out the old fence was not a little on my friend's property, but almost 10 feet onto his property. And the neighbors had built up raised flower beds and done a nice brick retaining wall right up along the fence line that they had spent a lot of money just in materials for. Never mind the time they put into constructing it. Needless to say, my friend came away with the biggest shit-eating grin. For the mere price of $325, he was entitled to expand his yard of more than 30 years, about 800 square feet, and Karen and her husband, who happened to be the polar opposite of his wife in personality and was super nice, spent the next week moving their garden, retaining wall, and all of the dirt that was on my friend's property so that I could build the fence on his actual property line. Then they hired the cheapest contractors they could find to slap up a fence on their side of the property line. They spent almost as much as my friend did on their new fence. I gave my friend the friends and family discount. 3 years later, the last 20 feet or so of their fence is on the ground already, because it was such a shitty job that it fell over in a moderate windstorm this past spring. My friend's fence is still standing, rock solid, and his dogs are definitely making good use of the extra 800 square feet. 3. When I was a teenager, I worked as a dishwasher every Thursday for 6 months. This restaurant was disgusting. We, the dishwashers, had to use the same towels multiple days in a row, because there were no clean ones, which is extremely unsanitary in a kitchen. The chefs and waiters absolutely abused their power and asked me to do so much extra work as if I didn't have a mountain of dirty dishes, glasses, and cutlery to clean. I could be extremely busy and suddenly have to run out and buy something for the chef, and when I came back they were annoyed because they didn't have enough plates or whatever. I was also scolded for washing a cast iron pan with soap, even though nobody ever told me how to wash it properly, and I didn't know what it was. A few times I was called in to work in my day off because they had an event, and when I told them I had to leave at 10 p.m. because I had school in the morning, they just laughed and reminded me that I could leave when I was done, sometimes at 1 a.m. They exploited the fact that I didn't know how to say no. But the worst one was the fact that everyone always left before me in the evening, because they were done and wanted to go home. I was a 16-year-old girl and was responsible for closing the restaurant up all alone, and I had to walk 300 meters down a creepy alleyway when it was dark at night to throw out the trash. I was all alone at night in the city centrum in a dark alleyway. My grandfather was picking me up one night, and he was so mad about it that he asked me to quit right away. My mom agreed, and I quit. But before I quit, I had been getting my own petty revenge for a while. As I said, I was alone at night. Sometimes I was alone for a couple of hours while I finished the dishes, washed the floors, and cleaned up after people. I knew that they didn't keep count of certain things, like how many sodas, ice creams, pancakes, etc. they kept in the freezer and fridge, so every time I was closing up alone, I had myself a little party. I was also starving because I never got any breaks to eat. So while I was washing up, I drank a couple of sodas, ate an ice cream, and maybe warmed a pancake or two in the oven for myself. I never touched anything important like the money. I just ate what I wanted, and cleaned everything afterwards, so they never knew. I even took a piece of cake or a sandwich with me home a few times. When I quit, the boss was mad, because I was apparently the best dishwasher they had. The other washers were lazy and unreliable, while I was very reliable and fast, because my mom taught me to work hard. I don't think I was anything special, though, but I guess it's hard to keep good employees when you treat them like this. I also got a recommendation letter, but I will always remember how sweet the food tasted while I cleaned up everyone's crap alone. 4. So when I was in my 12th grade, there was a really annoying girl in my class. None of us guys liked her, and most girls were not fond of her either. She would find every opportunity to make fun of us. Despite this, she was very popular because she was rich, and guys from other classes would date her. She acted so nice and cute with them, but she was the exact opposite to us. She'd often mock others when they got low grades, comment on our clothes, the food we bring, and literally anything. I think that I can actually call her a bully, because that's who she is. I'd often react back, so she had a special grudge against me. And she'd show that often, but I wouldn't mind it much. But one day, I lost patience. We were given group projects, and guess what? She was in my group. My house is very close to the school, so my group members came over to my house. Not really to have a discussion about the project. We had snacks and were talking in the living room. I noticed she was not here and I went to check the house. I entered my room, and there I saw she was squishing my pet rabbit under her feet. She didn't stop when she saw me. I shouted and she set him free. He ran away, frightened. I went after him and caressed him to calm down. Everyone was mad at her, and were telling her she was being too mean, but she didn't even mind any of that. Then all left my house, and while leaving she said, "It's just a rabbit." I can't really tell how mad I was, but my patience didn't allow me to say anything. But I wanted to get back at this. I'm a guy who loves collecting bugs and worms. Yes, you heard that right, including ladybugs, grasshoppers, garden worms, small spiders, and all of that. And it turns out she's afraid of these things. I noticed on many occasions that even when she sees a really tiny bug close to her, she'd be frightened and ask someone to get it away. So I decided to pull a prank. My house had a lot of cockroaches. I took one in the morning before heading to class, hid it in a small tin. In class during the first hour, I purposefully sat right behind her. The teacher had left the class and we were assigned with writing, and everyone was concentrating on it. I took out the roach and, without her knowing, slightly pulled the collar of her dress and slipped down the roach inside her dress. She didn't feel it at that moment, but then the roach being trapped inside might have tried to move, and then she knew something was in her dress. She started to scratch her back, and then I started laughing. She turned to me and I said, "It's just a cockroach." You should have seen the look in her face. It was unforgettable. She jumped out of her seat and started screaming and dancing around, trying to shake that roach out, but it just wouldn't come out. A few people seated behind me saw what happened and were laughing, but the rest of the class was shocked and they probably thought she'd went insane. The only way she could take the roach out was to take the dress off, and she realized it. She ran to the washroom, screaming along the way, of course. When she left, I told everyone what happened, and they found it really funny. She didn't come back to the class. The next period, our teacher came and made me see the principal. I got a lot of scoldings, and I apologized for it, and even though I found it funny, I actually did feel sorry for her, because I didn't expect she'd react in this extreme way. The next day, she came to the class, and she was so embarrassed to face everyone. For a few weeks, she wouldn't annoy us in any way. If anyone's done similar pranks involving bugs, do share it. 5. I moved to the small town of Townville, Delborough, in the Mid-South USA, from a small city in the Midwest in late high school. Fell for the boy next door, and settled in for the long haul the second he gave me the time of day. But I'm still an outsider, really. My father-in-law, Phil, had been the elected mayor for some years, I think like 7 or 8. There were some bridges burned towards the end of his final run, because he didn't have anything to lose by saying some things. Some were better deeds than those that led to the subjects still hating him and being petty enough to take advantage of their position. My husband and I recently moved back to Townville, Delborough, into the old house his parents had built on their property when they had moved to their newly finished home. So we're living in their house on their property, but we do have separate houses on opposite ends of 15 acres. Those 15 acres, part and part out of city limits, me and my significant other had moved into the home within city limits, which we knew, but hadn't been made aware that Phil had a beef with the town code enforcer. I don't think they were ready for my chaos. I won't tell you all the little things they tried, but this was the beginning of these petty attempts to mess with me in order to mess with Phil. Didn't take long for them to show they were going to reprimand us for every small infraction, even when no one else was bothered for their similarly trivial offenses. Our first spring, they started with our dandelions. This wasn't a code violation, but a warning that we were on thin ice, I guess. Keep in mind this isn't an HOA, just a small town, left its good old boys to, well, be boys. but they were being Karens and singling this property out, and for something I don't give a fuck about. I like dandelions, and it did affect everyone. Well, I've been a pro at weaponizing my competence since birth, I'm told. Because the property is still in parents' names, they got the town's correspondence as well as us. But I told Phil I'd take care of it. I don't think he believed in me at all. My nieces were over all spring while their parents worked. I gave them a quarter for every dandelion they wished during our walks all around town, the public parks and such. Kiddos had a blast and made some dough. I did not spray or weed my lawn, but everyone's was a mess after a few weeks. So they couldn't really say anything to me since it was now the least weedy. Second story, since that one was a lot of exposition. Late that summer we had a 10-day vacation in which the lawn grew and then came back during a huge storm-full week of rain. So the fenced-in yard had about 3 weeks to run wild. I hope you're clutching your pearls, I certainly am. The grass was therefore overgrown, and therefore the town council sent me essentially mow your lawn or else letters, but it was too high and too wet to mow easily with my push mower. I could have paid someone or borrowed a neighbor's rider, but I wanted my petty revenge of doing it in the most annoying, disruptive way. Cue me calling up a few friends, asking, "Kara, can I borrow a goat? Ash, don't you have a few chickens? Hey there, Matt, can I borrow a sheep or two for this petty BS, please? Pony? Yes. I had a friend of a friend who loved shit like this. Seriously, we bonded when his now ex-wife got caught cheating. I did pretend to be his new age inappropriate girlfriend, who dropped off a teensy miniature horse as the pièce de résistance of my lawn mowing team after having a trailer pull up and unload 4 other species into my yard one by one for a few hours. The decent neighbors were excited and interested or rolled their eyes at my ridiculousness, but I knew I'd have Karens watching and complaining, and the town would jump at the chance. The representative of Townville Dale Borough delivered a door handle hanger thingy the following morning. Basically, farm animals are not allowed to be owned in town as per Ordinance 4.2066-669, blah blah blah. This was the first time I bothered to look up the code so I could use it against them. It wouldn't be the last. Nice try, but I'm just borrowing them anyway. It would have been great to see the look on their faces when they found out their petty revenge to my petty revenge hadn't worked. Good old Phil, or Golf, if you will, was finally impressed with my creativity and passionately unhinged follow-through. We had some interesting run-ins and a span of months of back and forth of childish poking at each other. It has been a great new hobby, to be honest. I don't have a whole lot of drama in my life. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 322. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, as always, I would appreciate it if you pressed the like button. It's just a little thing, but it does help YouTube recommend the videos to other people. All part of how the algorithm works, I guess. And if you'd like to get early access to these videos, then you can support me through my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. Hellfreezer on Patreon. You'll also find a link to the Hellfreezer Teespring merchandise store. Get yourself some lovely hoodies and mugs and such. And if you'd like to make donations, or tips, depending on how you like to phrase it, you can press that little heart with a $sign just below the video, and you can leave a tip of your choice. And you don't have to do this. Please don't think you're ever obligated to do this, because you aren't. And no one should ever make you feel like you are, because I know there's some shady YouTubers out there who do, but I do appreciate it, and it's been helping a lot. Okay, let's move on to other business. So I don't think we have any shout-outs today. I don't think. Nope. No birthday shout-outs either. I think the next one's the 24th. So let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, and this one comes thanks to Kira on the Discord, and they ask, if you could replace a standard primary school nativity play with any other Christmas play, what would you want to see? I mean, personally, I'm way fonder of A Christmas Carol in all its forms than I am of this standard nativity. Much more exciting, much more appealing, because, it's got ghosts, it's got turkeys and various other things, but mostly the ghost part is quite cool for me. I used to have a tradition which I've gradually just fallen away from as I've become a grumpy old man, but I used to have to watch some version of A Christmas Carol. Didn't matter if it was one of the old black and white ones, the Muppets version, or even Scrooged with Bill Murray, which is a very good movie. Great performance from John Glover in that, as I recall. But I used to have to watch it, so yeah, more Christmas Carol. The more of that, the better, I think. But why don't you let me know what your answer is in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.